black, brown, white. He mobilized so many people. It is because of him that we got Barack Obama.
He would not want us to have sanctimonious mornings if we weren't going to get up and do the work.
This is Today as It Happened. Good Tuesday evening to you. I'm Holly Furfer. I'm here with your chronological look at the biggest events and stories of the day. From the death of a civil rights icon, Reverend Jesse Jackson, to the ongoing negotiations over funding for the Department of Homeland Security amid the partial government shutdown. But first, this morning, our international correspondent gave us a look at nuclear talks between the U.S. and Iran in Geneva. The U.S. and Iran are holding their second round of nuclear talks in Geneva today. U.S. envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are leading those talks. And President Trump has threatened to use force if Iran does not agree to constrain its nuclear program. Iran's foreign minister says he has real ideas for a fair deal, but will not submit to threats. The negotiations come as Iran fired live missiles toward the Strait of Hormuz during military exercises in waterways where 20% of the world's oil passes. All right, Scripps News international correspondent Ross Cullen is live for us in Paris with more on these important talks. And Ross, it seems like what they're talking about, the events around them, it's getting pretty serious.
Yeah, Holly, good morning. Getting very serious. We understand that those negotiations have now come to an end. The Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi was there in Geneva on Monday to lay the groundwork, speaking to the International Atomic Energy Agency Chief Rafael Grossi, because we understand that that's where the US wanted to take the direction of travel of those negotiations to ensure it could try to create the conditions for a new nuclear deal with Tehran. Perhaps limits on missiles, perhaps limits on the missile production as well, and how far any potential weapons can travel. Iran wanted a fair deal. It will remain to be seen what comes out of that meeting, if they agree to a third meeting or if they have already managed to agree a framework of a potential nuclear deal. But that was just the first piece of business for Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, because they have further meetings on a different issue later today.
And Ross, I want to follow up with the situation in Iran, because it seems to me like the U.S. government, President Trump, really is looking for regime change in Iran. Do you think, though, if they came to an agreement, he would let the leader stay in place? Or is this something where he wants to see a complete change with government, especially in light of all of the mass protesting that's happening in that country?
Yeah, that's right, Holly. If you just look at the military build-up, we've seen the USS Gerald R. Ford in the Gulf, and now joined by her sister ship, the USS Abraham Lincoln, and the threat by the Trump administration to reserve the right to use force against Iran if there is no willingness to sign up to a deal by the leaders in Tehran. We've also heard from the US president previously, in US Senator Lindsey Graham this weekend at the Munich Security Conference, that help is on its way for those thousands of people who were protesting at the start of this year against the theocratic regime. Marco Rubio alluded to that in his speech at the Munich Security Conference, saying it's very difficult to make a deal with leaders who take their guidance from God. But he did believe that there was the possibility that the US should continue those negotiations to try to get an agreement with Iran. We know the United States president has also suggested perhaps the son of the former Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, could potentially be a transitional leader. We do know, though, that the US president has also said that he thinks that regime change could be the best option for Iran.
All right, and what you alluded to in earlier, both Witkoff and Jared Kushner are also involved with the Ukraine-Russia negotiations, also taking place in Geneva. What's the latest with those talks? What should we expect?
Yeah, certainly the Swiss city really in the spotlight now. We've had the US and Iran meeting under the auspices of the Omani consulate, and now we're going to have the US and Ukraine and Russia having their next meeting for two-day talks. So over the next 48 hours, Holly, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will be there as the mediators between Moscow and Kiev to see if there's a way forward for any possible agreements, a pathway to a ceasefire, a pathway to an eventual peace accord, maybe at the very least a prisoner exchange. But there will be the key issue of land, because we do know that the US president has said and the Ukrainian president has said that 90 to 95% of the talking is done. The security agreements are finalized. The security guarantees have been pretty much sorted. It comes down to land. I also was in the room here in Paris last month, Holly, with Steve Witkoff, when he also said that 90 to 95% of the issues have been sorted. So it comes down to that issue of contested areas of eastern Ukraine that Russia wants Ukraine to give up. Ukraine doesn't want to cede that territory. It's spent a lot of money, and a lot of thousands of lives have been it's cost thousands of lives to defend that territory so far. Ukraine has suggested that it could pull its troops back if Russia does the same, and that could potentially create a demilitarized zone or a free economic zone that the US could have some kind of interest in going forward.
And Russ, is there really a concerted effort from both sides then to come into this with an open mind? Because it seems like we're really at a stalemate. Like you mentioned, last month they said it was 95% done. This month they say it's 95% done. So how do we cross that threshold and get that final 5% written, signed, and a peace agreement done?
Oh, but it's almost a stalemate on the front lines, Holly. I know from having reported there for Scripps inside Ukraine that the situation is almost one of attrition, especially now when you're fighting in winter in February, extremely cold. The ground is frozen there as well. And Russia make these small gains and might take parts of a village. But we've seen in the last week or so, especially counterattacks by Ukraine to try to push back some of the Russian advances. Really, Russia has not been able to take the full control of eastern Ukraine militarily, so it would like to do so diplomatically, would like to get Washington to force Kiev to give up that land. But of course, the Ukrainian president, you can understand his position, says this is our territory, according to us, according to the United Nations. This is our territorial integrity that many soldiers have died to protect. We don't want to just give it up and give it to Moscow. And anyway, if you are going to have any kind of border change, that would have to go through the Ukrainian parliament, that would have to go through the Ukrainian constitution, there would have to be a referendum and all sorts of things. So just to end with one thing that the Ukrainian president has said, Russia has said it will stop firing missiles for 24 hours if Ukraine can hold an election in 24 hours. The Ukrainian president says we can't have an election under martial law. We can't have an election when it wouldn't be safe to go to the polling stations or the ballot boxes. But if you give us a 2-month ceasefire, which is respected for a full 8 weeks, then I will hold a presidential election.
All right, tough road ahead, but there seems to be some hope. International correspondent Ross Cullen live for us in Paris. Thank you so much for that update, Ross. Okay, now let's take a look at some of our other headlines that are topping the news of the day. People across Southern California woke up to streets that look like rivers. This after heavy rains drenched Los Angeles Monday, creating a traffic nightmare for many. Several drivers had to be rescued from their cars as those floodwaters rose. Luckily, no one was hurt, but more rain is expected today. In less than 24 hours, Mark Zuckerberg will take the stand in the landmark trial against social media apps. Zuckerberg's Meta and YouTube are accused of intentionally designing addictive features that hooked a now 20-year-old woman as a child and harmed her mental health. New Mexico's Attorney General is confident Zuckerberg will be found liable.
It's been interesting to see just how much Meta's behavior mirrors that of the kind of criminals that I've been investigating and prosecuting throughout my career. One of the most sort of common tactics for people who are caught in doing something that they shouldn't be doing is to blame law enforcement. I don't think Meta's behavior is any different. And the jury's going to see through that sort of distraction, and I have every confidence they're going to be found liable for their conduct.
The lawsuit brought by Kaylee and her mother is the first of more than 1,500 similar lawsuits to go to trial. Now to the latest on the search for 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie. The Pima County Sheriff says Savannah Guthrie's family members are not suspects in her mother's disappearance. Sheriff Chris Nano says the Guthrie family has been cleared and calls them victims in that case. 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie vanished from her home February 1st. The sheriff says the family has been cooperative and gracious throughout the investigation. Authorities are examining tens of thousands of tips and evidence, including DNA found on a glove and an unidentified backpack. Coming up on Today As It Happened, the partial government shutdown is dragging on as lawmakers continue to negotiate funding for the Department of Homeland Security. So stay with us here on Scripps News for congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed's reporting. That's right after the break. Welcome back to Today As It Happened. Let's check back in on our daily briefing of the day's top stories. Now, a partial government shutdown is dragging on into another day, and this means hundreds of thousands of people are still working without pay. This as Democrats demand changes to how immigration operations are conducted. Scripps News congressional correspondent Nate Reed joins us live from our D.C. newsroom. And Nate, understands Senate Democrats sent a counteroffer to the White House and to Republicans. Was it accepted?
At this point, doesn't seem like we have much movement there, Holly. We really don't know a whole ton beyond the fact that that counteroffer had been sent over from Democrats, who, by the way, had previously said they were going to send one over the weekend. To just give you a sense of the slow pace things are moving, this is almost like a shutdown in slow motion. That counteroffer was sent. Now we await a response from the White House. I've just, my Scripps News White House correspondent, Haley Bull, will be reaching out to them shortly to try and see if there's any movement there. I've reached out to representatives for Senate Majority Leader John Thune, also Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's team as well. At this point, it really seems like these negotiations are happening in slow motion, and Democrats had made that list of 10 demands. They turned that into a piece of legislation. They sent that over to the White House. The White House then responded. The response from Democratic Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer was to the White House effectively, get serious. At the end of last week, he held a briefing where he really did not shed a whole lot of light on what exactly the White House had offered in return. So now Democrats have sent a counteroffer. The question is, will this be accepted? Will they be in a position that they are able to get to reopen the government? The cruel reality here is, Holly, Congress is on recess. The Senate, House of Representatives, both out of D.C. They're willing to return to D.C. with anywhere between 48 and 72 hours notice, depending on the chamber. But the problem is that already puts us by the end of this week if a deal were to be reached right now. And then there's obviously the question of, would it pass? So the reality is it seems like this partial government shutdown going to last at least a week. Remember, a lot of these government employees who are furloughed right now or told to work without pay, their next paycheck isn't coming for quite some time. It wouldn't be until early March. Likely that they would start to see some of their paychecks bounce effectively, getting paychecks for $0, which is what we saw during the last government shutdown. But the cruel reality of this is we do not know the next time that some of these government employees are going to get paid. Democrats remain dug in that they want some changes, structural changes to the way that Immigrations and Customs Enforcement operates. Republicans have largely said that some of the Democrat demands are unreasonable. Democrats believe that public opinion is on their side. Now we wait, caught in the middle, of course, those hundreds of thousands of federal workers, TSA agents, FEMA employees, Coast Guard enlistees, who are not getting paid, might not see those effects for several weeks, but at the same time, cannot expect on a paycheck, at least for right now.
And Nate, let me ask you about next week's events. We have a State of the Union address. How might this affect what President Trump would say or not say, and how Congress responds? I mean, normally we like to hear the State of the Union is strong or the State of the Union is great, but can that really be said with all of this going on?
Well, look, it gives certainly the president an opportunity to bash the minority party, who, of course, is withholding support for that government funding bill in exchange for what they're calling those critical common sense reforms. This is obviously kind of what a lot of the State of Unions have looked like in previous years. It's one party versus another. This is kind of a glorified campaign speech on Capitol Hill where the audience is twofold. It's not just Americans sitting at home watching the speech, of which appears to be a dwindling number year after year, but it's also members of Congress who will, of course, be, making their partisan applause, not necessarily even sitting through the whole speech. We've seen in the past members leaving partway through if they're not happy with what the president is saying. It's likely going to be a very partisan affair, clouded by the fact that the government will be partially shut down, likely for that speech, unless there's some sort of 11th hour deal. Of course, that is always a possibility, but with every passing day, Holly, it seems more and more likely that the State of the Union is going to occur during a partial government shutdown, something that just even a couple of years ago would seem unprecedented.
All right, Scripps News congressional correspondent Nate Reed, thank you for that update. We appreciate it. We'll be back in just a moment as we continue tracking today's top news. So glad you stayed with us here on Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer with your daily look at the day's biggest stories.
People on both sides of the aisle paying tribute to the late civil rights icon Jesse Jackson Jr. The pioneering civil rights leader died peacefully this morning alongside his family. His death following a struggle with a rare brain disease. President Obama saying in his 2 historic runs for president, Jackson laid the foundation for his own campaign to the highest office of the land. President Trump, praising Jackson as a force of nature. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries calling him voice for the voiceless. Jackson is being remembered as Dr. Martin Luther King's protege. His son spoke to CNN this morning, getting emotional at times, remembering his father.
His legacy was that Jesse Jackson was authentic, and he called us to an authenticity, not to a politic, not even to a political party. He called us to our authentic selves. And I hope that people will see the genuineness in who Jesse Jackson. It's hard for me to say it because my father is now a was and not an is. But he gave it his all. He gave it his all.
Jackson was a champion for voting rights and formed Rainbow Push. Push pressured businesses to open up to black workers and customers. He was not only a civil rights leader, but also a 2-time presidential candidate, a shadow senator here in D.C., and an international negotiator who secured the release of hundreds of captives around the globe. He was 84 years old. The Department of Homeland Security's top spokesperson is stepping down. A Trump administration official says Tricia McLaughlin's departure could happen as soon as next week. A source saying she started planning her resignation in December. They say she stayed on after those ICE agents shot and killed 2 U.S. citizens in Minneapolis. McLaughlin is one of DHS's staunchest supporters. There is new evidence emerging in the case involving a Chicago woman who was shot 5 times by a federal agent. You may recall she is the woman where the text thread said 5 shots, 7 holes.
All right, it's time to get aggressive and get the out because they're trying to box us in.
We're going to make contact and we're boxed in.
We are boxed
here.
All right, they're following, man. All right, out of the car.
Be advised, we've been struck. We've been struck.
Get out.
Scripps News national correspondent Katie Tubman has been following this case. And Katie, does this mean that the shooting was targeted?
Exactly. New evidence shows that Marimar Martinez, the woman you just mentioned who was shot 5 times by a CBP agent last October in Chicago, was already on the government's radar before the shooting and considered a threat. Now, we previously reported how Martinez fought for the release of evidence in the government's now dismissed case against her, and she and her attorney have argued that it would completely contradict the Trump administration labeling her as a domestic terrorist. And going through that evidence, we're seeing just that. We found this internal report from CBP, which was gathered by the CBP's Intel unit. The report flagged activity in a local ICE Watch Facebook group just days before Marimar was shot. It specifically flagged that this message that was translated to read, "Hey to all my gang, let's expletive those expletives up. Don't let them take anyone." Now, Martinez's attorney, Christopher Parenti, told Scripps News that the person who wrote that message in the Facebook group is not Martinez. Yet still, this message was attributed to her by the spokesperson of the DHS, who is stepping down, as you mentioned earlier, and it was used by the government as justification for the shooting, accusing Martinez of targeting federal officers and saying she was a domestic terrorist. Take a listen to what he told us.
The scarier part of that is the quote from Tricia McLaughlin that was attributed to Marimar that kind of started a lot of this and kind of started this labeling of domestic terrorist. They quoted Marimar in one of these groups as calling for action of violence against ICE. I would assume if you're in one of these Facebook groups, you're on the radar, because it appears what they did was anybody in the group they did a background check on.
Now, Del, while Parenti said he doesn't believe his client being flagged by CBP in this report means she was targeted in the shooting, he warned that anyone in these ICE watch groups, like Martinez was, is most likely on the government's radar and considered a threat. He said despite the evidence of this report, the government has failed to retract their statements about Martinez and to end what they call and what he's calling a false narrative that protesters and observers like Martinez are domestic terrorists. Del?
What it does show, though, is that they have been tracking all of the social media profiles of so many of these people who wound up on the streets. Scripps News national correspondent Katia Tubman. Katia, thank you very much.
Coming up on Today As It Happened.
Everything Dr. King and Reverend Jackson stood for is at risk right now. Supreme Court is weighing right now Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Right now, we're seeing what's going on with ICE and deportation. So we have the challenge not to mourn Jesse Jackson. He would not want us to have sanctimonious mornings if we weren't going to get up and do the work.
Welcome back to Today As It Happened. This is Scripps News' end-of-day snapshot of the biggest stories of the day. So why don't we pick up right where we left off?
Tributes continue to pour in for the Reverend Jesse Jackson. The pioneering civil rights leader was 84. His life was defined by a relentless fight for justice and equality. From the Jim Crow South through the turbulent 60s and into the Black Lives Matter movement, Jesse Jackson was a constant, unyielding voice for justice.
The Reverend Jesse Jackson spent his life in service to civil rights, the advancement of voting rights, and advocating for the poor and underrepresented. Reverend Jackson started working with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1965.
I learned so much from him. Such a great source of inspiration.
Joining him for the march from Selma to Montgomery for voting rights. And he worked to pressure companies to hire black workers. He was with King when he was assassinated in 1968. A few years later, he broke with King's Southern Leadership Conference to start Operation Push, based in Chicago, working to register voters in communities of color and promoting diversity in companies across America.
The only time that we win is when we come together.
Jackson ran for president twice, in 1984 and 1988, with better than expected results, finishing second in the primary in 88, better than any black candidate until Barack Obama won the White House in 2008.
I don't think that we can underestimate the impact of him, just the act of running. He wasn't fully successful, but I don't know if that mattered, right? That he showed that there's a need for it, that he really did lay the groundwork for Barack Obama to be a viable candidate.
He was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by Bill Clinton in 2000 and remained a public voice for civil rights, despite a Parkinson's diagnosis and neurological disorder later in life. Part of the Black Lives Matter movement and present in the courtroom for the Ahmaud Arbery trial.
I really can't think of any single individual who's had more influence after Dr. King's tenure here than Reverend Jesse Jackson.
The Jackson family releasing a statement saying, in part, Our father was a servant leader, not only to our family, but to the oppressed, the voiceless, and the overlooked around the world. His unwavering belief in justice, equality, and love uplifted millions, and we ask you to honor his memory by continuing the fight for the values he lived by. Reverend Jackson is survived by his wife, Jacqueline, and their 6 children and grandchildren. He was 84 years old.
Mark Morial joins us live now from New York City. He is, of course, the president of the National Urban League, a civil rights organization. Mark, as always, thanks for being with us. First of all, your thoughts on the passing of Jesse Jackson. And by the way, it's not disrespectful. Those of us who knew or covered him remember him as Jesse.
And I think Congressman Danny Davis captured it so well in your segment. That is that no one singularly had the influence that Jesse had in the period from 1968 to the present. And I think what he should be remembered for is many things, but he built that bridge from civil rights into electoral politics. And that was a powerful bridge. His candidacy in 1984 and his candidacy in 1988 defied the odds, because what he simultaneously did is ran against the Democratic establishment, Democratic orthodoxy, while simultaneously providing a critique on the politics and the policies of Reaganomics of the 1980s. He was successful. I had the distinct pleasure and honor of serving as a Jackson delegate to the Democratic Convention in '84 in San Francisco and in '88 in Atlanta. And many of us, I was in my 20s at the time, were struck and felt a place to belong in American electoral politics through the candidacy of Reverend Jesse Jackson. He paved the way for Bill Clinton by expanding the electorate. I think his candidacy paved the way for people like Doug Wilder and David Dinkins, who were elected as governor of Virginia and mayor of New York, respectively, in 1989, through his advocacy and his electoral expansion efforts through registering people to vote. He certainly, I think, was a precursor to Barack Obama. He should be remembered for that impact he had on electoral politics.
You know, I'm glad you brought up the fact that he did represent the bridge between civil rights and politics. Speak to the pulpit that civil rights provided for future politicians, because, as you know, during that time, there was controversy about whether a minister should stay in the pulpit and not necessarily go into the political arena.
Well, Dr. King, I think, set the tone that a minister and a man trained in religion could and should bring the teachings of New Testament Christianity to the moral and political issues of our time. And I think Reverend Jackson helped to inspire a new generation. Dr. King began it, a new generation of those who were trained as ministers and ordained into activism. Think about Reverend Al Sharpton, a prominent protege of Reverend Jackson, but many, many others all across the nation who understood that activism in furtherance of the moral teachings of Christianity were absolutely consistent and called for. Jesus Christ was an activist, an itinerant, an irritant who challenged the status quo. So those that suggested that ministers didn't belong in politics really didn't know the traditions and understand the traditions of activism that had long been part, I think, of the Christian church.
Mark, I want you to get your thoughts on this, because as I was thinking back on the movement, one thing that stands out, and it seems to be simple, and yet it is so important. Jesse Jackson lived. MLK died at the age of 39. Malcolm was 39 as well. Bobby Kennedy was 42. We never got to experience a world where those icons lived long enough to see their dreams materialize, but in Jesse, we did. Your thoughts?
And I think his longevity, his great tenure of some 50 plus years in the public eye are also an important part of his legacy. You know, he, I think, demonstrated, and he evolved over the years as an activist. And one part of him that I like to emphasize is Jesse behind the scenes. Jesse as negotiator, Jesse as diplomat. He played a prominent role in the release of many political prisoners, but he also played a role at the table negotiating with corporations. I remember the negotiations we were involved in after Don Imus's very absolutely reprehensible statements against the Rutgers women's basketball team, when we challenged two networks at that time to take Imus off of the air. Jesse spearheaded that effort. Jesse led that effort. It led those negotiations, which ultimately were successful.
Yeah, he also made sure that other black broadcasters stayed on the air. Final question before I let you go, because it looks like we're losing your signal. Will he be better remembered as a civil rights icon or a political trailblazer?
I think they'll both. I think the uniqueness is that he built that bridge. Before Jesse, there was sort of a sense that civil rights leaders could not or should not make that transition, but many made the transition. Andrew Young, my father, Dutch Morial, were civil rights lawyers, civil rights leaders who found their way into politics because that transition and government was an extension of the civil rights movement. And that is so true even today.
Mark Morial, president of the National Urban League. When I said he was joining us live from New York, I didn't know he was joining us live from the canyons of Manhattan. But Mark, as always, we thank you for your time and your expertise.
Straight ahead on Today as It Happened.
He was supposed to be here, but we were told in no uncertain terms by our network's lawyers, who called us directly, that we could not have him on the broadcast.
You're watching Scripps News.
Welcome back to Today as It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. All right, let's jump right back into our rundown of the top stories of the day.
Late-night talk show host Stephen Colbert says CBS told him to punt on his interview with Democratic Texas Senate candidate James Tallarico. It was supposed to air last night.
He was supposed to be here, but we were told in no uncertain terms by our network's lawyers, who called us directly, that we could not have him on the broadcast. Then I was told in some uncertain terms that not only could I not have him on, I could not mention me not having him on. And because my network clearly doesn't want us to talk about this, let's talk about this.
Scripps News political director Andrew Rafferty joins us now. Fascinating to watch this all play out. Yeah. Colbert says that's what happened, but is there more to the story than that?
Yeah, there's some context here, as you might imagine. Of course, CBS has been in sort of the headlines for their efforts to placate to what some of their critics say to President Donald Trump. Of course, Stephen Colbert out the door. He only has a few months left. But what the sort of backstory here is that the head of the FCC, Brendan Carr, sent this sort of warning just a couple weeks ago, actually. It was very recent, that saying that these equal time exemptions, this idea that you have to, if you're a broadcaster, give both candidates in a race or all the candidates in a race who meet a certain criteria equal access to your airwaves. There was a long time an exemption for things like late night talk shows. And Brendan Carr sent this letter to a number of free broadcast stations saying that, hey, you know, this long-standing precedent doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us, and we're going to hold you accountable. And so it sounds like what happened, if you kind of read the whole monologue of what Stephen Colbert said last night, was the lawyers for CBS said they didn't want to get sued, so you can't have them on. Now, that is one part of it, and then here is the other part of his monologue last night.
Let's just call this what it is. Donald Trump's administration wants to silence anyone who says anything bad about Trump on TV, because all Trump does is watch TV. Okay? He's like a toddler with too much screen time. He gets cranky and then drops a load in his diapers. So it's no surprise that two of the people most affected by this threat are me and my friend Jimmy Kimmel. When this letter dropped, we both talked about the letter on air, and then later, Carr defended it like this.
If Kimmel or Colbert want to continue to do their programming and they don't want to have to comply with this requirement, then they can go to a cable channel or a podcast or a streaming service, and that's fine.
So you hear them also, Colbert mentioning Jimmy Kimmel, who, of course, very high profile. His show was pulled from Sinclair-owned stations last year for comments related to Charlie Kirk. It is worth noting, though, Del, that this may have been one of the best things that happened to Tallarico. Just looking before I came on.
I was just getting ready to ask you.
Yeah, it was about 6.8 million views on X, 1.7 on YouTube. There's also TikTok, Instagram, a whole host of other platforms where this has been doing big numbers compared to the 2.3 million who watch Colbert nightly. So a lot of attention for a candidate in the Democratic Senate primary who, quite honestly, has already gotten quite a bit of attention from the mainstream media.
Yeah, people who don't know authors don't realize that authors say, please ban my book.
Yeah.
Because if you ban the book, more people wind up going to Google and saying, oh, what is it about this book that got banned? Yeah. This, by the way, was the first major primary of 2026. It's going to be closely watched.
I know, and it is exciting to think that we're already talking about a heated primary in Texas. Is a little
for
bit
you.
early.
I can hear people right now pulling their hair out, to tell you the
well,
truth.
At least if you're outside of Texas, this probably you won't be flooded with ads. But Texas, early March, this is a little bit of an outlier. We're not going to see this heart of primary season until later this year. But this is, as you mentioned, one of the key contests that we will all be watching, both because of a very heavily contested primary, and that could lead to who ultimately controls the Senate. On the Democratic side, it is Tallarico, as we were just talking about, and Jasmine Crockett, who, if there's anyone, Tallarico said that was the interview, his talk with Colbert, that Trump didn't want you to see, and actually probably it was Jasmine Crockett who was probably more impacted by it. She is the other leading Democratic candidate, and we are going to see them square off. Both of these candidates have been arguing about electability, who will be better in the general election, which, oh, by the way, the Republican side has plenty of drama too, Del, because it is John Cornyn, of course, a longtime incumbent senator from Texas, going up against Ken Paxton. There's also another candidate, Wesley Hunt. If neither of those candidates get 50%, then we're going to see a runoff later in the year. But Donald Trump was asked about this the other day because his endorsement on the Republican side could put one of these guys over the top, and he just says that he likes them all. He's staying out of it. Both these guys are really trying to cozy up to the president as we see early voting, which, oh, by the way, also begins today in Texas, begin. And both of the Republicans, including Congressman Hunt, want to portray themselves as the most Trumpiest of all the candidates.
Was it P.T. Barnum who said there is no such thing as bad publicity?
Well, I'll trust you on that, Tom.
Well, perhaps until the Epstein files. Scripps political director, Andrew Rafferty. Raph, as always, thanks.
Thanks, Tom.
We'll be right back to continue our rundown of today's top stories on Today As It Happened.
Police saying they have arrested an armed 18-year-old today. Chief Michael Sullivan saying the man parked his Mercedes SUV near the Capitol and then ran towards the building. Officers got him on the ground. They said he was wearing a tactical vest and gloves. He had a Kevlar helmet and gas mask in the vehicle. The chief says the suspect dropped his loaded shotgun when challenged by Capitol Police. Police are asking for public help on any footage that they might have of the incident. A little extra in savings can keep you afloat when a job or health crisis hits. The trouble is, a lot of people find that their savings have flatlined. Scripps News business and tech correspondent Mara Barrett takes a look at why our savings have stalled.
Americans are under pressure to save while also carrying heavy amounts of debt. While people want to build on their savings, rising costs have forced many to put those plans on hold. Saving money is top of mind.
You wake up thinking about it, you go to bed thinking about it.
Many Americans started the year wanting to spend less and save more.
Take little steps at a time, I guess, is like what I've tried to do over the years.
Still, savings goals feel out of reach. Bankrate's annual emergency savings report shows 58% of people have about the same or less emergency savings than last year.
Costs have gone up. Inflation is wearing on household budgets. People are trying to make their dollar stretch further. And in doing so, there's a little bit left over to simply pad the emergency fund.
The company's social profiler gathers data by examining social media profiles.
We see what everyone is liking and following and build our reports based on that.
They found financial strain peaks in midlife.
The strongest age correlation is in the 30s to 40s when they align with active learning about real estate, saving for their first down payment, simultaneous debt and credit score management.
A common dilemma? Pay down debt or increase savings? Rod Griffin at Experian says it's not one or the other. High interest debt should be tackled, but knocking out small balances can help you stay motivated.
Math doesn't recognize human emotion, and when something just seems like it's not going anywhere, it can create frustration and cause you to give up, which is the worst possible outcome.
Experts say you don't need thousands to start an emergency fund. The problem is outside costs getting in the way, like higher energy bills.
Now you got to worry about your bills going up for the wintertime.
And pricier insurance plans.
That adds up to thousands more dollars a year.
It amounts to less saved and less peace of mind. Now is actually a great time to think about your savings. If you receive a tax refund this year, consider putting it in your savings account. And same applies to 3 paycheck months. When you get a third paycheck, that doesn't all have to go straight to paying bills. And experts say automate. Set up an automatic transfer of $20, $50, or $100 per paycheck to build up your savings. Maura Barrett, Scripps News Group.
Today is Fat Tuesday. You're looking live right now at the scene in New Orleans. As you can see, the activity has picked up. As they say, let the bon temps rouler begin. The colors, by the way, of the beads. We have some background information for you, just in case you're curious about the people that you see with the beads. The color purple, gold, and green all have meaning. Purple, of course, is for justice. Gold is for power and green is for faith. I have been told by our control room that we cannot talk about what they have to do to get some of those beads. As they say, that is a horse of a different color. And on the subject of horses, by the way, millions celebrate the start of the Lunar New Year. It is not just about the festivities, but also about honoring key traditions that are believed to bring good fortune. Scripps News International correspondent Laura Westbrook introduces us to the year of the horse.
We've left behind the year of the snake. Now it's the year of the fire horse. That only comes around every 60 years. Here in Hong Kong, a lantern display is part of the festivities, which include a New Year's parade and fireworks over Victoria Harbour. Across the border, officials in Beijing expect a record 9.5 billion domestic trips during the 40-day Spring Festival period. That's up from about 9 billion trips last year. Hundreds of millions of people crisscross the country to make what is often their only trip home to see their families. Food and family reunions make up a big part of celebrations. State media says the holiday will unleash vitality to propel China's economy forward. Increasing domestic spending has been identified as a key priority for the year ahead. But a weak jobs market and a protracted property crisis are hampering spending. The horse is one of 12 Chinese zodiac animals, representing a 12-year calendar cycle. According to tradition, the horse represents freedom and speed, while fire represents intensity. This means 2026 could bring opportunity or chaos. In any case, it looks like a year of bold transformation. From Hong Kong, Kung Hei Fat Choi. Laura Westbrook, Scripps News Group, Hong Kong.
We appreciate you spending some of your evening with us here on Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. Have an excellent Tuesday night.